Thanks for joining us this day on a discussion about the history of finance in the system of vocational education over the years. Today we refer to it as career and technology education, but in our days, as we built this history, it was vocational education. We have with us today Mr. Larry Hanson, who spent some 35 years here in the system, and for the past 17 years been alumni of the organization. So Larry, welcome this morning. Thanks for joining us. We also have Becky Sneed. Becky has spent 36 years here with the agency. Becky was a very young lady when she came to work for the department as a secretary, and has been with us for many years, and we've certainly enjoyed her expertise and her company with us here in this agency. Next we have Norman Filtz. Norman joined us in 1970. Norman joined us some 2 years after I joined the department in 1967, and is a bookkeeper. And Norman, you have been working here for many years and certainly have seen the dollars change over the years since you've been here. So welcome and with us here this morning at a discussion table.
Thank you, Ari.
And our other individual with us this morning is Dwight Stoddard. Dwight comes to us as an auditor back in about 1974, I believe, Dwight. Dwight spent some 31 years here with the agency, 27 years,
27.
I believe. 27 years here with the agency. It's certainly been a stay here and keeping our records correct and making sure our audits are all in place as we should be. So thanks for joining us this morning with a discussion. And so this discussion will start today with some questions to Larry Hanson. Larry, you came to work in this agency, I believe, about 1947, or was it 49? One of those years back in the early 40s. And so tell us a little bit of what you were doing back in those 1940s.
All right. Well, I came aboard in September 1, 1947, the first time. And at the time, I had met Mr. Perky on 2 previous occasions, and a mutual friend mentioned to me one day that Mr. Perky was looking for an accountant and a cashier. They had a lot of money, and they weren't sure they were keeping track of it as well as they might. And I was looking to make a change, and having met him, I think I called him and they invited me up to Stillwater. So I started September 1, 1947 in the Veterans Agriculture Training Program. The Veterans Agriculture Training Program was a product of the GI Bill of Rights passed by the federal government in the latter part of 44, 45. And in that GI Bill, there was, a provision for home loans and also what they called institutional training. That was at the junior colleges and the universities primarily, but it also applied to trade schools and business colleges. So the institutional on-farm training phase of the law, or in Oklahoma converted to the Veterans Agriculture Training Program, was established in May of 1946. That's when the first classes were organized. So when I got there about a year and a half later, or not quite that long, but they already had 5 administrators, 14 district supervisors, a teacher trainer and a subject matter specialist, and 35 clerical people, which is a staff of around 56. And the other vocational programs at the time, like Ag, Home Ec, T&I, and DE, two of them, one of them being located in Oklahoma City and the others here, along with Mr. Perky and his administrative assistant. There was only 31 to 32 people against the veterans program of 55 or 56. Now they were located at the corner of Monroe and Athletic Avenue on the southeast corner of that intersection. There are life science buildings, what they call Life Science West, I think, is there now. But on that corner, when vocational agriculture and Mr. Perky were moved to Stillwater, they built a frame building facing Monroe. And when the veterans program became so large, then there was space on that lot to make an addition that ran east and west, was formed an L. So the Veterans Agriculture Training Program was in this, the north part of this L. And there, at the time, there were probably 300 or so schools participating, and upwards of 500-600 classes. And I know that the peak of the program while I was there, there was as many as 356 schools participating, public school districts. This is a program operated through the public schools only. And over 750 instructors at one time, with an enrollment of over 15,000. And these trainees were required to have a farm unit which consisted of at least 200 farm units based on a count of what, you know, for instance, a dairy cow was worth 13 units, a beef cow was worth 3 units, a hog was worth maybe 1 or whatever, and an acre of crops was worth so much. So they had to have at least 200 units, you know, a viable farm operation to enroll in the program. And they received about, a single man got about $90 a month, and a married man, I think, was 110, and if he had a child or two, it was maybe a little bit more, 120 or so. And the program, when it started, had a lot of problems as far as the cash flow is concerned. The veteran enrolled. Well, at the time he enrolled, his enrollment papers got to the state office and was processed to the Veterans Administration, and he got on the Veterans Administration pay list. Well, it was generally at least 2 months and probably 3 months before he drew his first check. So it was the same way with the department. They were getting just enough money to send out to the schools to pay the instructors and not much more and pay the staff. So we came to a period when a lot of this got, we had made improvements as far as the billing process was concerned, and the cash became in more on time, and so we had quite an accumulation of cash one time when we were supposed to make a financial report. And we had to make an annual budget to the Veterans Administration every year, showing, you know, what our expenditures were and list everybody's salary, not the trainees, but we had to list all the staff and all the instructors in schools. So one of these years, naturally, the question was raised when we accumulated the money, well, we got all this money, what are you going to do with it? Well, we hadn't sent the schools what they were entitled to for, say, for example, building operation and maintenance, or for textbooks, or consumable instruction supplies that had been borne by the school, you know, out of some other funds. So the VA wanted to take this money, you know, deduct it from our next contract. So we had to make trips to Washington. And this Bonnie Nicholson was the state supervisor of the Veterans Agriculture Training Program, and he was assisted by Earl May and Cecil Maynard. Cecil is still a resident of Stillwater. Mr. May, after a couple of years here, he went back to the farm in Tillman County and spent the rest of his life there in farming operation. And anyway, Mr. Nicholson had me explain the financial situation to Mr. Perky. He suggested we go to Washington to meet with the Veterans Administration. We met with him usually here in Oklahoma. They had a regional office in Oklahoma City and Muskogee that we met with frequently. But in explaining the process to Mr. Perky and with the Veterans Administration, we kind of got all through. Larry, he said, one thing you should know, when a big dog and a little dog gets in a fight, always bet on the big dog. So that was one of the first Perky witticisms that I heard and I remember. But anyway, after about 13 months, my family didn't particularly care for Stillwater. We had left, when we moved to Stillwater, there wasn't much housing available. And what we had to take was a little bit less than what we left.
Where'd you move from, Larry?
Pardon?
Where'd you move from?
Oklahoma City.
You moved from Oklahoma City to Stillwater.
Oklahoma City. I started in 1938 working for a firm owned principally one man. He had several interests, and I'd spent about, I think about six years. Then I went in the service a couple of years, and then I went back to my old job for a year and a half, and then came to Stillwater. But I somehow had an opportunity. I don't remember how it developed, as being a kind of a general manager in a machinery company in Oklahoma City, heavy equipment, road machinery, and so forth. And it kind of appealed to me. I thought it had possibilities, but turned out that was, so I went back to Oklahoma City mainly because a family was interested in getting back there.
So when did you finish this project?
Pardon?
When did you finish the project?
Well, we didn't, when I came back then, I had a chance to come back September 1, 1949, which was 2 years, not less than a year after I left, because they were way behind in auditing the schools. They had one auditor, so I thought this would just be a short-term deal, and I took it as a short-term deal. So I came back there in September 1, 47. And then in July 52, July 1st, well, it was toward the end of June in 52, Dorothy came with me for that one. We were going to have some kind of a doings here, and so she came with me that day, and she just was looking around town, and so mid-afternoon she came into the office and said, I found 3 houses for rent. She was ready to move back. Well, it turned out in visiting, well, we think maybe about 1 more year. So as it turned out, well, we knew we were coming back, but it was probably just for 1 year. So we closed the program when Mr. Nicholson went to Service University, representing them in Ethiopia. So with his leaving, then they let me become the state supervisor of the VATP. This happened about 57, I guess. So the program kept declining, and finally came down to where there was just me and a secretary. And it was closed June 30th, 1961, I believe. And the few remaining people in training, instructors were down to handling 2 or 3 trainees only. And it was an opportune time for the State VOTEC department to be removing themselves from the picture. They had other projects to look after. So the state accrediting agency assumed command. Each state had the state accrediting agency for the purpose of approving veterans programs. So so I left then June 30th, 61, and then a few months later, Mr. Perky called and said, I had a program that might fit in with your schedule or take a look at. He said, I think it's about a half-time job. And what it was the Area Redevelopment Act training program. The Area Redevelopment Act was passed in 60, somewhere along in there, and first funded in 61, fiscal 61. And so that was a program where we set up training, and the individuals were put in a 20-hour training program and received a stipend of so many dollars, remember what it was, so many dollars a week. And the first 6 programs were set up in vocational agriculture departments in eastern Oklahoma. Tahlequah, Stillwell, Holdenville, the others I can't call just at this time, but And as we went along, this was a partnership deal with the State Employment Service. We submitted a proposal for training. They'd tell us, we can justify a training program based on the opportunities for employment in McAlester or in Tahlequah or in Miami. We set up office programs in McAlester and Miami right after these fire mechanics programs, and then we added repeats in fire mechanics at some of these places and at other places. And we were able, with the Employment Service, to get Washington to change the 20-hour kind of program to 30 hours of training. And these people were in training. A lot of them in some areas came in with partial skills. They like some of the ladies, the young ladies could type and had a little bookkeeping or maybe shorthand, and with refresher training would make themselves employable. Well, these programs were set up for 16 weeks, ARA, that was the limit. And long after a year we were operating the ARA, the Manpower Development Training Act had been funded, had been adopted by Congress and funded. And it came along a little bit stronger. That started out with 30 hours a week, as I recall, but they could have programs up to 52 weeks. So that let us put some LPN programs under MDTA. And usually, like ARA, the class was to run 16 weeks and then stop. Then the Employment Service had the responsibility of employing these people at the end of training. Well, we both found out that that was a difficult situation. It's hard to replace that many people in a place like, say, McAlester or Holdenville at the end of the training. So we got wiser, and we began, as soon as people got ready and the job became available, well, they were placed. But we still couldn't get the Washington people to approve, now we've got an empty slot, let's put somebody else in. Didn't work that way until later on.
Was this the beginning of the open entry, open exit concept that we adapted?
Later on we got into open entry, open exit, and it was a lot easier as far as placement is concerned when when you having them coming out, every week instead of all at the end of a term.
Larry, you mentioned the program Manpower Development Act, and that's where Becky kind of comes in with part of this. I believe she was employed about that time, yes, when that was becoming part of the agency. So Becky, what did you come in here as?
Well, I was really hired as a secretary for Manpower. We called it the Manpower Division then. But at that point, they didn't really have a place for me. So the Mr. Nicholson that Mr. Hanson referred to was working on the state plan at that time. He had come back in, I guess, after working for the Veterans Program. And he was a really big buddy of Mr. Perky's, and so he was writing state plan. So I had a little typewriter table, an electric typewriter that was not a correcting typewriter, and sat in the corner of his desk and typed that for a few weeks before my job actually became available in Manpower. I worked in an office with 5 other people that is now the BITS training conference room. We called it the bullpen. We had 3 secretaries on one side, 3 supervisors on the other side, and 3 file cabinets that separated us down the middle. So the facilities were a lot different than they are now, and we didn't have near the equipment we do now.
Did you ever work for Mr. Hanson as far as?
Yes, I did.
You ever type reports or letters for Mr. Hanson?
I typed a lot of things for Mr. Hanson, and I came to learn that it didn't matter what you did, he was never going to approve it the first time. It would always come back with some little something that needed to be changed.
Okay. And how did you change that? I mean,
We didn't change that. For as long as I remember working for him, that was just, you just knew that there would be something that would be changed a little bit on it.
Well, you didn't have corrective typewriters.
Oh, okay. Well, we took it back and we retyped it, and if we made a mistake, we used our little eraser because we didn't have correcting typewriters at that particular time.
The best I remember, Mr. Hanson was kind of tough on those erasers.
A little bit. And we went through carbon paper that people don't even know what that is anymore because we didn't have copiers, so everything was typed with carbon paper, and our file copy was on those yucky yellow sheets of paper.
So those are the reports you submitted on.
Right.
Very
That was
good.
the beginning. That was before we got into typing audits for Mr. Stoddard and those things that came later.
Oh, I see. Very good.
Do you remember the time that a staff member wrote a letter, a short letter, about probably 20 lines or so? And Mr. Perky had gotten a copy of it and had circled all the I's in that letter. You remember that?
I don't remember that, no.
Well, this individual had gotten too many I's, really, you know. We're taught usually, you know, not to use that letter I too often. And he sent me a copy of it. Somebody gave me a copy of it because I was working with the individual that got this letter. That sure improved my correspondence. There was another thing that happened early on that it's a little incident. It's interesting. Coming to the State Department and working for Mr. Perky, who had an agriculture background, and Mr. Nicholson, he was one of the star athletes of OSU and Oklahoma A&M as his time, had made for many years his record of the number of athletic letters stood. And he became a vocational agriculture teacher and then a superintendent of schools. And then he came in as a state supervisor and was assistant state supervisor for ag for Mr. Perky when this VATP started. Well, one of the things, early things on, you know, about letter writing, I had my secretary at the time, we were writing a letter, and this had to do with some policy and more with the program. And we didn't pay just a whole lot of attention on this rough draft about our grammar and punctuation. And when I gave it to Mr. Nicholson to check over to see if, you know, if we were on the right beam, well, all the remarks about the business stood as we had written them, but there were a couple of verbs that were wrong and a couple of punctuation marks that I think the young lady that was typing for me would have caught. But I was kind of impressed, but you know, these fellows in agriculture, they're pretty good English majors too.
That's correct. Norman, let's go over to you, because you joined the agency in about 1970. And what was the budget like in those days when you first came out here?
Well, I went back and did a little bit of research as far as to the flow of dollars. The year that I joined this agency, the budget was approximately $13 million. If you contrast that to today's budget, our budget is well over $160 million. To me, that is phenomenal growth in that window of time. But I went back even a little further and did some research. And back in 1964, the federal funding was only $800 and some thousand. There was a new federal law that came into place that we refer to now as the VE Act of 1963. And that was the first big growth in federal funds that came to the states. And that was one of the things that authorized the expenditure of funding for construction in area tech schools. And so the funding from 1964 going into the VE Act of 63 jumped to $4 million just in 1 year, which was, again, percentage-wise, an extremely large growth. And so I think that was one of the things that stimulated our area tech system in the state of Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Dwight, some 4 years later, after Norman joined here at the agency, we were called upon to hire an extra auditor. And the best I remember when that Mr. Hanson gave me the authority to go out and to interview some auditors, and I had a little trouble getting you approved through Mr. Hanson. I believe I had to have a couple of interviews with Mr. Hanson before I could get you approved. What was our problem?
That is correct, Mr. Beatty. Being a personal friend and a college cohort of Mr. Phelps, I thought I had the inside track to this job. Back then, the affirmative action is not what it is today, and I probably could really say it's who you knew, not what you knew, back in those days. I had just finished a 4-year degree in accounting, but Mr. Hanson's hang-up was at my current position, I believe, I was the business manager of a chinchilla ranch.
Chinchillas.
And that's a small fur-bearing animal, and but that's where I developed the expertise, I believe, in small business management, the payroll taxes, Social Security requirements, the bookkeeping requirements. Had 2 rounds of interview with Mr. Hanson. I don't know if he'll remember this. He was officed down where Mr. Boggs is officed now in agricultural education, and it come down from my side of the point to 2 applicants, myself, which was a little older with a little experience, and a brand new young college graduate that had hair down to about here. So I think if you can look at Mr. Hanson and myself, we both are fans of short hair. And Mr. Hanson's last question to me before I think I really was approved for employment, he was I believe he was the chair of the hospital board at that point, and we had a brand new hospital going in next door, and Mr. Hanson asked me, and Mr. Hanson, I don't know if you remember this, he says, "Can you develop me a cost accounting system for the hospital?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I sure can." And the next thing I know, I was getting ushered into C. Francis Tuttle, which is the sign that you're going to be employed here.
Well, you've been here for several years, and how have you seen the change in accountability and audits take place over the past 27 years?
Well, I've seen it in 2 areas. One with the state legislators, Mr. Beatty. Back then, we would get a call requesting permission, requesting information, and that was back before cell phones, pagers, fax machines, and we first had to either find you or Mr. Hanson somewhere to relay what the request was, get your response, go into Mr. Phelps's ledger books, we did not have computers, or to the file cabinet, into Becky's yellow copies of correspondence, and try to put together a response. We would then have to try to find you again and tell you what the response was, and then you would either approve it or change it, as Becky says, and I'm a student of Mr. Hanson because I also can say that I never got anything through him originally. It always come back with a big L on it, which means there were some changes to be done. And back then we didn't have computers, and they were spreadsheets, which meant after he had written on them in ink, then you got to redo your spreadsheets again and try to get it through him again. But it usually took us about 3 days, because then we'd have to type the letter and mail it to him. And today, you know, my phone rings, I catch you on your pager, you give me the results, and within an hour or less, we can respond to just about any request from down south at the state capitol. On the audit side of the house, the biggest change has been probably the Single Audit Act. Before 1984, we had a federal audit. We may have someone from the Department of Education, and that gentleman's name was Easy Pickens. My first encounter with him was with some unallowable disadvantage and handicap expenditures at one of our tech schools. It happened to be we were using disadvantage and handicap funds for a training program for unwed mothers, and he took exception, saying that was not a disadvantage or a handicap, and disallowed the expenditures, which caused quite a bit of problems on our side trying to reassign, reallocate those expenditures to other funds. But where he got the name Easy Pickens, I do not know. But Mr. Phelps always informed me that Easy Pickens was coming, and don't worry about it, he's going to find something, and regardless of what we tried to do. But I guess the Single Audit Act, instead of having 2 or 3 different auditors come in and audit the same records. The Department of Education would come in, then the Department of Labor, and then maybe a year later here would come someone from the state auditor's office auditing the exact same records. And the Single Audit Act of '84 put an end to all that. One audit, everyone agreed to abide by the results of that audit. And then of course, over time, the content, the audit procedures have not changed. You go out and you check the records for compliance. So the actual auditing part of it has not changed over the years, but the format of the audit reports is a constant change as to what's in the audit report, what documentation you have to sustain your audit findings and things like that.
Okay, very good. Mr. Hanson, in your comment, you mentioned that there was a division in Oklahoma City in the early years. What division was that?
Well, the division that remained in Oklahoma City at the time, first I guess I should say that in the late 30s, after Henry Bennett had been made president of Oklahoma A&M at the time, somehow or another he saw the advantage of vocational education moving into Stillwater. The four divisions that were operating, agriculture, home economics, T&I, and DE, all had a teacher training budget item. And the teacher trainer was in all instances except one at Oklahoma A&M. Home economics, my recollection is, had a teacher training or two at the University of Oklahoma as well as 2 or 3 here at Oklahoma A&M. And I think that's why home economics stayed in Oklahoma City while Mr. Perky's office and the agriculture, T&I and DE were all located here at Stillwater. And eventually, well, one instance, health occupations that started here in Stillwater was moved to Oklahoma City.
That's right.
And then both of them were moved back under Dr. Tuttle's direction.
So the home economics was located in Oklahoma City in the state capital?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's where the financial agents, Paul Bryant and his assistant, they were in the state capital until Mr. Bryant resigned. We used to prepare claims, state claims, and send them to Mr. Bryant, and he would file them with the budget office or whoever was appropriate, and then he'd send the warrants back to Stillwater to be mailed out. And all federal fund, excuse me, all federal funds, when I came to work, and prior to that, and for a few years, were dispersed by Mr. Bryant. We sent the claim to him, and he would write the check, and had a check protector that had Mr. Perky's signature on the plate. Mr. Perky didn't sign the things individually. At one time, Mr. Perky signed each and every claim, but they got so big, it got so many that I think finally they let most of them go with the district supervisor, the state supervisor's signature. But anyway, Mr. Bryant would make out the checks, they're registered in this book, and send them back to the division. The division kept track of all its money. There was no finance department other than what Mr. Bryant had in it, and you see in this book that the records are by division. There's an 83 in some of these books. We had a stamp, a rubber stamp, and an ink pad with silver ink. And for every piece of equipment we bought, we stamped 83 in your division letters, see, like 83T, 83V, 83U, and the record was kept of that. And back until after the war, there weren't many changes in furniture. Furniture was all sturdy oak and been purchased many years before and was still in use, and there may still be.
We still have some evidence
some
of that around
tables
here.
around, but and if you look underneath somewhere, you'll find that silver stamp 83 something. But anyway, that's kind of the story of how we all happen to be here. to carry it a little bit further, then every once in a while a legislator would get his ire up at something a state director did or didn't do, and kind of had the threat of moving everybody back to Oklahoma City. During Governor Bartlett's tenure as governor, then a bill was introduced, I think, by our Senator Robert Murphy at the time that established the State Department of Vocational Technical Education under a state board of vocational education that was increased to 13 members, and she'll be, housed in Stillwater. So.
There you piqued my interest by talking about the division that's located in the Capitol building, knowing how crowded that building there is today. And was it located there on the third floor or the?
Yes, our offices there, we were in a practice of the biennial, legislative sessions. Every other year, the legislature came in session, and they didn't meet as long. The speaker and the president pro tem changed nearly every session. Now it's a little different. But anyway, like in Paul Bryant's office, he had quite a bit of room when they weren't in session. But when it came in session, they put him and a lot of others up on the 5th floor in little areas that weren't air conditioned back there in those days. You had to open the window and have the fans on. And I think that was one of the reasons also that induced Mr. Perky to want to move out of that Capitol complex. For years, I don't know, all during the time Mr. Perky was director, he pretty much handled all the legislative matters. In fact, there weren't very many, but not near as what they are now. But anyway, I got the understanding that I didn't have any business in the Capitol. Not in so many words, but I just knew that, like the other people, that we had no business in the Capitol. That Mr. Perky would handle all that, which he did. But when his health began to break, and he couldn't go much, and we got all these other federal money became a larger issue. He kind of backed off on that. But if you were going, now that's one thing I learned when I came to the office that I didn't have when I was working for a private employer. Every week we filled out the itinerary, plan your work your plan. Mm-hmm. And so it was pretty important that if you were a district supervisor traveling or a state supervisor that this plan be filled out every Monday morning and be made available. So if they wanted to find you, they did. And I don't remember, it probably happened, I don't remember a single time that I couldn't be located within a reasonable amount of time. The only unfavorable incident occurred middle of one morning, I think, when I called in. You were supposed to if you change your itinerary, you're supposed to call in. But for some reason, Mr. Perky wanted to get a hold of me, and fortunately, he located me right away. And I was working with Manpower at the time, and had an appointment to meet with the representative from the Employment Service at some town. And Mr. Perky wanted me to come back to Stillwater. And I said, well, I'll be in, Mr. Perky, as soon as we finish this this discussion about this new training program for whatever it was. He said, Larry, who signs your check? So
I'll make the assumption you were back there.
said, I disremembered. And so I went back to Stillwater.
There you go.
But that's the only time. And it didn't amount to hell of beans when I got back. He thought it was time I remembered, I guess.
There you go. That's good. Becky, he's talked about communication here and especially getting hold. When you came, how was the telephone service around this agency? And I remember through the years of talking about a Watts line. Tell us a little bit of how the telephone service was.
It wasn't like the Watts lines of the day. You had to call, when you finally got a phone, I don't even think I had a phone to begin with, and when you got one, then you had to call the operator. We actually had a switchboard operator that's not quite like the one today, and you had to call and put your name on the Watts line list, and they would call you back and tell you when it was available to be used.
Did you get to use it?
Occasionally,
Occasionally.
yes. But if it was authority from one of the bosses asking you to place a call for them, yes.
That was the only time you could
Right,
use it.
right.
Yeah. Dwight, you've had a little bit of experience with Watts lines, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
So,
Well, my telephone experience started, of course, in Finance Division. We had two lines. Really, we had one line. Mr. Beatty had extension 208, and all the rest of us in finance had extension 206, I think. And it was push buttons at the bottom, and the light would be on means somebody else in the Finance Division was on the phone, and you'd find yourself trying to think and watch that light, because when that light went off, you'd try to push it and get the telephone line. And usually somebody else was faster than Dwight, because I'm left-handed and the phone was on this side. So just getting a phone call was experience. And I can't remember when the phone rang who answered it, but they would holler out Dwight or RL or Norman 206 or 208 or whatever the extension was, which is why I want to tell you why I go by Dwight, because my real name is DL, and when I went to work here, DL and RL in the same office did not work, so Mr. Beatty says, you've got a name, I don't. My name is RL. You have a name, please use your name. So I started going by Dwight, but up until then I was always known as DL instead of Dwight. So that's probably my experience with the telephone early on.
good. Norman, you've had a lot of changes, especially Larry was mentioning some of the accounting systems and the stamping of warrants and those kind of things. You've seen a lot of changes here too, from the ledger book that you have demonstrated here today until what we have today. Tell us a little bit about some of those changes.
Well, that is true. When I came to work, I was a bookkeeper, and our technology was a pencil and some of these large ledger pads. In addition to that, we used a calculator. We still use calculators, by the way, and they're a necessity from time to time. But the technology has changed quite a bit, and one of the things I recall specifically is that we started implementing a new computerized system of accounting. And at that time, we had an old IBM key punch machine that was operated by Carol Ebert. And for each claim, we would enter the data on these IBM cards, and we would accumulate these until the end of the month. At the end of the month, I would put these in a box. We had a special box designed to carry these cards, and we would go to Oklahoma City. We had a RCA Spectra 70 computer that we shared with the State Department of Education. And this computer was located in the tunnel between the Sequoia and Will Rogers building. It was an old tube-type computer, a huge thing. And they had to have special air conditioning in there because it got so hot. And I remember the people that worked there were Bill Randolph and Gene Thaxton.
Yes, right.
And we would take these down there, and basically all it would do is take the information off the cards and give you different sorts. But that was our first experience with computers, or at least my first experience with computers. But a little bit later, it was decided that we were going to put PCs on people's desks around here. And I know that was somewhat of a controversy. Does everybody need one, and will they adapt to it? Well, I guess Dwight and I were two of the last holdouts. And I think, RL, you kind of gave us
that. I believe Norman, you may have been the last one.
that could have been. Anyway, one of the first softwares that I saw that I felt was really needed for our office was the Lotus spreadsheets. So we had hired a trainer by the name of Joe Carrick to do computerized training, or PC training. And so he was relatively new at it, and he didn't know exactly what he was doing, so it was determined that Dwight and I would be his special guinea pig test students to teach this Lotus training. So we would come in at 7 o'clock every Monday morning, and we did this, Dwight, how long? Probably for 6 months?
Oh,
for a long time.
Long time.
And I guess we were kind of the first test people to prepare, train, right, pilot people for the Lotus training in this organization. But to this day, we're pretty good at Lotus, and in fact, everyone else is going to Excel, and I think Dwight and I are the only two still use Lotus.
We're still going to be using it.
No,
Oh, there are still a few.
Word perfect in Lotus.
Now, you're still under the DOS version, right?
Well, I think we've gotten a little bit beyond that. But we did use DOS for a long time. But the little computer that I've got on my desk, though, today will do probably 10 times what that big RCA Spectre 70 would do back when I came.
That's correct. Becky, anything else you want to add to this? On
Well,
some
you're
of the
talking about the electronic. A lot of it goes about, he said pencil too. I have to say that we did not use pencil in these ledger books. They had to be pens. We were instructed from day one, pencils were not put into ledger books. You used your pen. And when we processed claims and everything, then we actually got a warrant in, and we were mailing warrants. And I got a paycheck every month that I had in my hot little hand. Well, we've changed all that, and if Norman had his way, everybody would be doing it, but we don't even see our paycheck these days. I don't have warrants to mail for our Carl Perkins payments. Those are done electronically, so those schools don't see checks anymore. So it's just amazing from then till now what has changed as far as our paper in our hands.
Mr. Hanson, would you expect that to happen over the years? Times that you have seen writing out those warrants yourself, and those today where we transfer cash electronically?
Well, I didn't envision that. Probably didn't think too much about it because I grew up in the pencil, pen, and ink system, and in the veterans program, that was my first exposure to key punch. We had 2 key punches. We were entering all the veterans information on that. And the university had a big, I think they called it tabulator then. We had a card on the veterans, and then another place they could put in the tabulator, they could put the month for which it was paid, so the card didn't have to be punched every month. And I thought that was getting into something new. But no, the way it is now, it's kind of fascinating and interesting. But I'm not too inclined to learn the details of it.
Well, you stayed up with the technology, Larry, during your years. You stayed up with the technology that it changed over the years. Norman, one of the things we haven't talked about is acronyms that we use here in this agency over the years. Tell us a little bit about some of the acronyms that we use here in accounting that...
Well, I know a new employee coming to this agency is just blown away with the terminology that's unique to our VOTEC or CareerTech system. And I've seen a lot of these come and go, but all the student organizations have an acronym, and a lot of our divisions have an acronym, but I guess one of the big change agents that came through this organization was Leo Presley. And I don't think any division stayed the same for more than just a few months. And he was one of the big promoters of acronyms. And I know he's the one that came up with the acronym for TIP, which is still used today, the Training for Industry programs. And he had BITS and ITS and so forth. But there was one year that was specifically prolific, I guess, in adding all these acronyms under his administration. And we were putting the budget together and adding all these new division name changes with these acronyms, and so I got to visiting with Dwight and I said, we need to kind of take advantage of this situation. And so when it came time to prepare the finance division budget, we, unbeknownst to anyone else, renamed it Finance, Accounting, and Travel Services, which the acronym became FATS. And we printed up the draft copy and delivered it to you and put it on your desk and didn't say a word. Boy, the next morning you came to work and you were in our office asking for an explanation. So I thought that was a little...
You guys were just testing me out to see if I read the budget.
that's correct. We wanted to see if you did your homework.
That's right. Dwight, do you have anything to do with this?
With FATS, yes, sir, I sure did. We try to have fun at work, and we seem to do very well at having fun at work. So,
Mr. Hanson, one of the things that I remember through this legislative process, you and I had spent several hours before an appropriation committee member in those days on the House side by the name of John Skelly.
Miss Skelly.
Skelly, John Skelly. That's correct. Tell us about some of the meetings, or at least one of your favorite meetings that you had with John Skelly.
Well, the one I remember the most of all, it wasn't by far the best one, but Mr. Skelly was usually a hard-working legislator. I mean, he wanted to know answers and this and that and the other, but he was an individual that had various levels of tolerance, interest, and so forth. And this one meeting we had, if you remember, I think at the time he might have been assistant chairman, vice chairman of the Appropriations and Budget Committee. And he saw all these state supervisors, district supervisors, and that kind of thing, assistant state directors. And man, he came unbuckled. You know, what do you need all those supervisors for? You got overloaded or whatever, and he wouldn't hardly let us explain. You know, each state supervisor covered a different occupational area. You know, but he wasn't interested in an explanation. He just knew that we had too many supervisors, whether they were state or district or whatever they were. But fortunately, Mr. Skelly could be handled by some of his colleagues, and I don't know, he did in the final analysis, he did a minimal amount of damage, didn't he? I mean, he just caused us a lot of grief, but in the final analysis, he was kind of bypassed when the decisions were made by the chairman and others.
Yeah, he was. You're right. He gave us a lot of grief at times about questions and answers, and that's what we had to call on guys like Norman and Dwight to give us information about all those salaries and those information. And we also had another supporter that I think was the Speaker of the House at that time, and that was Bill Willis, who was a very good Speaker for the House and really did a lot of things for our system here in Oklahoma. Dwight, you had the fortune of kindly doing some audits over, and one of the Skill Center was named after him at Tahlequah.
Yes, sir.
Over in the Bill Willis Skill Centers. Anything stand out in your mind?
Oh, yes, sir. To start with, about every other year, Mr. Hanson, I think he did it on purpose, but we'd change contracts. One year we'd contract with Tahlequah Public Schools, and they had their favorite person to be the Skill Center director, and then the next year we would contract, I think it was with the Soil Conservation Service, Becky, and they had their favorite person that wanted to be Skill Center director, so Mr. Hanson had me on the road quite a bit to Tahlequah. We spent a lot of audit time in Tahlequah about various sundry items, but
the man we treated worst of all was Will Anderson. He had that in his territory for a long time.
It all ended up with one evening with Dwight, Mr. Hanson, Will Anderson, Ariel Beatty, Jess Banks, Francis Tuttle, all showing up at the same little old hotel over there to take personnel action one morning, and I got to come home. But Tahlequah was, back in the early days, Tahlequah was a very interested audit client of mine.
One of the big players, we got in there at the request of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the tribe.
Never did find those Indian pickups.
They well, they wanted some help, so we got it from them and got it on a sound basis, and then they wanted to take it over again, which they did, because they had, and then they got the same fix again, and then all these other things that he mentioned came on. So it's surprising that things came out as well as they did, you know, over the long haul.
And they have a beautiful campus there today.
Yeah.
They really, truly do.
Yeah.
But Mr. Willis was one of our favorite legislators because he was helpful.
As we kind of come to a close of this discussion, I want to ask a little bit about the future. As we've been through the accounting, as we've seen things grow, Norman, you mentioned how much we have grown over the years. What do you see in the next 10 to 15 years or so in this agency?
Well, one of the biggest things I see is going to be a change in personnel in the finance area, because if you look at the staff that we have now, we've got a very tenured staff. In fact, several of us here at this table. I did some calculations the other day, and our average employee in the finance division has well over 20 years of experience. And so staffing is going to be a significant change. I also see continuing changes in our relationship and working with the Office of State Finance and the State Treasurer. As it was alluded to earlier, we electronically transfer a lot of payments to the schools and to the individuals for payroll and so forth. I think the next step is going to be electronic transfer of funds to all of our vendors, and we're going to get almost entirely away from the paper warrant as we know it today. Another area is the use of credit cards by state staff members. This has been something that's been a no-no ever since I've been out here, even though individuals have been able to have credit cards for their personal use and pay it themselves, but state government has been real slow to implement this in the state of Oklahoma. But just this week I've been working with other staff members, and this is going to be the next major change in the way we handle accounting.
Dwight, as I listen to this, kind of scares us old auditors to death that there's no documentation. It's all electronically.
Documentation. It's either by a telephone call or something off the internet, a purchase off the internet, no invoice to follow up with or to document why or what you purchased. But that's a trend we're going to have to learn how to deal with in the audit environment. The key is going to have the training and the internal accounting controls in place where employees must accept the responsibility that's given them, and for management to follow through with the policies and procedures. If you're not supposed to do something, then you're not supposed to do something. So that's about the only way we can handle the future as it relates to purchase cards. Another area that's coming along is I see government going downhill, as by not literally, but functions that were normally taking place at the state level, I see in the future a shift to the state agency level. We've already experienced in that. Norman has the agency now approved for the alternative claim system, which is we are the custodian of the claims. We do not send hard copies down to the Office of State Finance for a warrant any longer. Mr. Phelps has that responsibility, and as he proves successful in that, I see more and more in the future of normal state functions being handed down to agencies that have demonstrated that they can handle it.
It's a lot more authority, but with that comes a lot more responsibility.
Very good. Becky, you've mentioned carbon paper and manual typewriters and electric typewriters. What do you see in the office area?
Well, it's already changed tremendously. Like I said, we didn't have, I just see probably more and more advances in the technology field. Everything more electronically. I mean, I used to have to do a lot of handwritten or typewritten or computer-generated reports for the federal grants. I think that'll go more to all of it being done internet, where there won't actually have to be paperwork signed and sent. I mean, Norman used to have to sign all those reports, or even at the point now where some of those are done electronically without him, with no signature. I think it's just going to go more that way. We're going to have to probably change the way we're so used to all the paper and the way we're doing things to keep our jobs. Our jobs are changing, so we're going to have to be changing with them to do and learn probably different things.
Sounds true. Mr. Hanson, you have seen certainly a lot of things changed over the years, not only in the office, but just in your daily life. And when I started working for you some 30 some odd years ago, you were mayor of Stillwater. And you see, I know lots of changes in those kind of things. Any last comment you'd like to make to those viewing this tape today?
Well, sometimes I feel like the old timer, you know, that retired, and the MC mentioned, you know, the years he'd put in over, you know, and seen them, you know, a lot of changes. And what is your comment? And my guess is I've seen them, and I was against every one of them.
Fought them all the way, did you?
But no, that's, I think, you know, we should be prepared for change, and I think the changes that have occurred, some required some adjusting, but I think they've all been for the better.
You know, I've been accused of being kind of like you from time to time, whenever I would be opposed to some of these changes around here.
Well, it's hard to accept some of the things that are going on. I have my big pain over the past few years has been this telecommunications, you know, getting these telephone calls that you don't want. They've got to come up with something that can stop that some way, but I guess it's not come to the forefront yet. But
well, all those will probably take their place, Larry. I'm sure they will. One of the things as we close here today, though, I want to mention not only to this group and to Mr. Hanson, but Mr. Hanson, you were a role model to us as we started this our career here in the system. When I joined the department, you know, some 34 years ago, you were an individual we all looked up to be sure that everything's correct, and we did things honestly and that we could be respected in this area. And I think with the hiring of Norman and Dwight and Becky, we've tried to withhold that over the years. So I want you to know you've been a role model to this group here as well as to the agency over the years of how we've handled the finance. And I think for that reason, there has been no major audit findings over the past 35 years that we've been around here. And it all comes back to you, the example you set for each one of us, and the role model I think that you have led over that. So we want to thank you for being that kind of a person. So thanks a lot.
Ariel. Those are mighty nice, kind words. But that's one reason, the main reason I came back, because there's been a foundation of good people, good Christian people in this organization. And the supervisors that we had in the VATP, the district supervisor that I traveled with and met with, and the people in the vocational agriculture staff that I had close association with, I was pleased to be able, you know, work with those kind of people after having worked about 7, 8 years in industry where there seemed to be a little bit too much cutthroat and questionable movements one way or another. And I think the people that have succeeded me and been here that I've met, they're just the kind of people you like to be around.
That's true.
And know. And I congratulate all of you for your interest and dedication and the kind of job you've done with the department. I think it's been great.
Yeah. Becky, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
I certainly enjoyed your being working with you over the number of years and look forward to many more years to come. So thanks a lot.
You very much.
And to Norman, thanks for coming, being part of this, and you and I worked together some 2 years even before you joined us out here. And so we've had that opportunity to be together for many years, about 37, 38 years ago. And we certainly have enjoyed your, not only your professionalism, but also as a friend as well. Dwight, it's good to have you again with us. Enjoyed you keeping all of us square with all those audits, and we hope you continue to do that over the years. And we certainly enjoyed you being with us as well.
Thank you. I'd like to officially go on the record. Dwight is Dwight because of Becky. She trained me.
I do not want to take that blame.
I think with that we could probably end our discussion here today. But Becky, I'd have to say you did a good job. Thank you. To all of you, thanks for viewing our film. We hope you have gained some knowledge of the finance systems of the vocational education over the years, and we hope it will serve this agency well. Thanks for being with us.